Hey y'all, I'm Hope, and today I'm doing the Contradictions book tag, which was originally created by Only for a Page, and I'll link their original video down below. I originally saw this, though, a couple of days ago on Jessie May's channel, and also Eric at Break Even Books, I think, did this tag, I think yesterday as of time of filming this video. And I really enjoyed both of their videos and thought this tag looked like a lot of fun. So I'm gonna link their videos down in the description below because you should definitely go check them out. They're both fantastic. I think this tag, it sounds like a lot of fun because the premise is like contradicting yourself of like, I like this thing, but I hated this. And I just think that seems like a fun premise. So I've not been tagged, but we're just gonna do it because I want to. That's how this is gonna work. But the first prompt is, I love this genre, but I hated this book. And the first thing that came to mind for me for this one is that I really like crime procedurals, but I fucking hated Darker Than Night by John Lutz. This is I think it's the beginning of a series, the Frank Quinn series, and it follows a detective who's been disgraced and he's kind of got this last ditch effort to revive his career and his reputation. And he gets partnered up with a new detective who hates men. And the two of them are trying to hunt down the serial killer who I can't remember exactly what his whole deal was, but it was something to do with like murdering a women who were in like a specific kind of relationship dynamic or who said a specific thing about their partners. It was something along those lines. And the issue that I had with this is that I like unlikable characters sometimes. Like, I don't dislike unlikable characters. That seems like a very obvious paradox. I don't know. What I mean by this is that, like, I think that unlikable characters, whatever that really means, can be really interesting and enjoyable if they're written in a way that makes them kind of complex and interesting. And I don't think that's what was happening here. Neither of the protagonists of this book, neither of them had any redeemable qualities. They were both just kind of like self-interested, terrible people, and not in a way that was interesting to read about. It was just frustrating in the context of a mystery because they were both so busy being sad for themselves and complaining about having to work with each other that they were just not communicating about the things that they needed to be communicating about. I don't know why my camera is trying to focus on the random shelf behind me. There we go. Basically it was leading to a lot of miscommunication. There's the two of them being so focused on themselves that they weren't doing their jobs, and there was like tons of evidence being thrown right in their faces. It was so obvious, and they were just missing it all because they refused to talk to each other at all. Meanwhile, we're getting this backstory for the serial killer who's, I don't remember what his name was or anything, but we're getting this backstory for him, and he has this like really complex and tragic backstory that's like, yeah, what he's doing is terrible, but I totally understand how he got to this point and why he's doing this and why he's, you know, he feels that this is the thing he should be doing. So you get this very complex view of the serial killer, and I just thought that that part was really interesting and kind of a, like, I get why he's doing this, even if what he's doing is terrible and he needs to be stopped. So I thought that was really interesting, but I didn't like either of the main characters, and they were so wrapped up in themselves that they just simply weren't doing their jobs. I also want to mention that the setup for Frank Quinn is that he's been falsely accused of rape, and I believe this accusation was like several years before the story starts, or some period of time prior to the story starting, and it's kind of wrecked his reputation and career. But I'm kind of torn on that as like that being his thing that he's all like self-pitying about, because it's, I think it contributes to rape culture and the argument that, like, you know, being falsely accused of rape is this horrible thing that happens to people, and like certainly I can understand that being falsely accused of something would damage your reputation and your career for sure. But I think that just given what we know about the statistics of how frequently that actually happens, and what we know about the tendencies of police to abuse their power, it just rubbed me the wrong way that that was the setup for Frank Quinn. And at the time, I don't think I really had the kind of vocabulary or knowledge to put that together because I started reading it in high school. But kind of looking back on it now, that really, I think, bothers me that that is the setup for him. That, like, he's this good upstanding cop, but he's been falsely accused of rape. And just given what we know about the statistics of actual false accusations, I don't like that setup. And I reached a point when I was reading that book where I genuinely was like, I want the bad guy to get away. I don't think that's somewhere you want to be with a crime procedural where you're like genuinely wanting the serial killer to get away with it. I'm gonna stop ranting there though, because there's several more questions in this tag. And the second one is, I rarely read this genre, but I loved this book. And I've chosen a couple here, but I think I'm just gonna mention one because I went on a little bit longer there than I meant to. But I don't normally read poetry, and I loved Migritude by Shelja Patel. This one's really interesting because it was originally a stage performance, but this is a book about migration and displacement of people, and it kind of intertwines the author's own experiences of migration, of moving from, I think it was Kenya to the UK, and I think also to the US. It also incorporates her family history because her family, I believe, is originally from India and then they moved to Kenya. It also looks at kind of national history of people moving to Kenya from, I think, Uganda, and just like displacement of peoples across borders within Africa, displacement of peoples by like imperialism and colonialism, by the British invading India and other places. So it's just tying together kind of large scale and small scale things as this exploration of migration and displacement and the movement of people across borders and oceans and the movement of like objects and goods as well. So I just think this is really fascinating, and I don't normally read poetry, but this was so accessible, I think, because it normally goes like completely over my head, but I really got into this one and found it very accessible and easy to read. And there's also this really cool thing with this one where the first half is the actual like poetry and the like stage performance stuff, but the latter part of the book is called the Shadow Book, and it's all of her kind of notes and thought processes from the creation of the original stage performance. So you get this kind of extra insight into how she wrote the poems and the kinds of things that she was drawing on to write them. The third question is, or prompt is, I love this trope, but I didn't like this book. And for this I've chosen, and the real monster is man. I don't know if this really counts as a trope. I'm not really like a trope reader. I don't pay attention to that when I'm reading or like when I'm picking books to read, but I do love a book that goes, but the real monster is man. So we're going with that. And the book that I chose for this, the book that I didn't like was The Monster of Ellenthaven by Jennifer Geisbrecht, which is a little I think it's Tor novella. It might not be Tor, but it's this like little novella about a guy who's like literally a monster, and he and this other guy who start working together to get revenge on a city. And I think this is a really interesting book. The writing is really not quite flowery, but it's very lyrical writing, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But ultimately I think this book really falls flat because it's told through a bunch of like little vignettes of like little interactions between the monster and the guy whose name is Florian, I believe, and you see their relationship develop through that and slowly learn Florian's backstory and what's led him to this point of wanting revenge on the town. But I think because it's done in these short little vignettes, just the way that it's structured, I think this can work because obviously I've read other books that this has worked in. This is why I thought I would enjoy this. But I think it's so vague, it's left so vague that you never really connect with what they're trying to do or why they're trying to do it. And I genuinely don't remember like anything about this book at this point. So the kind of opposite of that is, I hate this trope, but I loved this book. And I chose miscommunication. This is a trope that I do know about, and I hate miscommunication. It angers me. But I really love Winter's Orbit, which has a lot of miscommunication in it. I will say this isn't like a favorite book of mine, but it's one that I think is a really fun and enjoyable read. It's very quick and easy to read as well, and I just love the characters, and that's what's really my favorite thing about this book is the characters. But the way that the miscommunication is done in this book is basically that it's not that the characters aren't talking to each other, it's that they're talking past each other. They have such different experiences in life that they're blatantly saying what they mean to say, but because Kiem and Janen are from such wildly different backgrounds, Kiem says something and Janen takes it in a completely different way, and he doesn't even realize that he's not getting what Kiem is saying, what Kiem is really saying. And so there's a term for this, and I can't actually remember what it is off the top of my head. It's a social psychology thing, but it's a something gap, and I can't remember. It may just be communication gap, but it's just the idea that there's a space for basically misunderstanding between when someone says something and when someone else interprets it, and that's the kind of miscommunication that's in here. And I'm fine with that because I think that this is resolved well in this book. But also I think that's more realistic of like two people just trying to have a conversation and just not getting that they're not understanding what the other person is trying to say. So I thought that this was really well done. I should probably mention what this one's about. It's an arranged marriage between these two guys in a sci-fi world where the planets that they're from, Kim is a prince of the Empire and Janin is from one of the vassal planets, and they get kind of pushed into an arranged marriage to solidify a treaty. And then there's also like a murder mystery and some political shenanigans happening. So I think this one's a lot of fun, and I just genuinely enjoyed the miscommunication here, whereas normally I really hate it in most books. The next prompt was, I love this author, but I didn't like this book. And this one kind of breaks my heart a little bit. I do want to preface this by saying I didn't hate this book. I didn't dislike this book. I was just disappointed in this book. And this is In the Shadow of the Axe by Nicholas Kaufman. He's one of my favorite authors. He's written one of my all-time favorite series, which is actually unfinished because it didn't sell well enough. And so I believe he wrote a post on his website about how he's not finishing it. But I have so much affection for so many of his other works that I really thought I was going to love this, but I just didn't. So this one is a horror story set in kind of the mid-1800s in a small German village, and it follows this guy named Kash. And he has been away for several years at boarding school in the wake of his mother's death, and upon his father's death returns to the town to basically deal with all the stuff that his father left behind. And strange things begin to happen, and his father seems to be tied to the village's history with a dark figure called the Necromancer that lived up on the hill above the village. And so there is some kind of like twisted family history, and Kosh kind of figuring out who his parents really were and learning about the town's history with the Necromancer who was gone before he was born. And I think that the setup for this one was really interesting, but ultimately I had some issues with the execution, mostly because it's extremely slow up until you get to like here. Like, it gets exciting here in the end. The beginning is setting up so many different relationships and things that I think it just needed a little more space. This is such a short book, and there's so many interesting relationships for Kosh. Once he returns to this village, there's the girl that he was friends with as a young man and who he now has a crush on, and there's his father's friends who were a part of the history that his father never told him. And so he's like slowly building these relationships and gaining information, but there's so much slow buildup that when you get to the end, all of a sudden it's like we go from 0 to 60 really quickly. It hits a breakneck speed, and the ending has to resolve like way too quickly in this short page count. And so I thought that the ending wasn't as earned as it could have been, although I do really like the way that this book ends. I think that it's interesting. I just think that this book needed a lot more space to breathe because there was too much happening, and all the action kind of got left to the end. Plus I really wanted a little more on the backstory, because we do get the backstory of what happened, but it takes a long time to get there, and by the time we get it, we're kind of like getting into the end of the book and things are about to like kick off. So I think that it just needed a little more space to breathe. I've lost my spot on the list that I have here. Okay, I previously disliked a book by this author, but I loved this book. And for this I've chosen Remote Control by Nnedi Okorafor. I previously read Binti, and this was another one where I didn't dislike it, but I was just disappointed. I'd had really high expectations for Binti because I'd heard so many great things about it, and then I just thought that it resolved too easily and that the stakes never felt real for the story. So I just was kind of disappointed in this one, but I ended up really loving Remote Control. I think that Nnedi Okorafor writes really fascinating characters, and I really enjoyed the journey of Sankofa and Remote Control, and just kind of the ways that she grew as a person across the story, and the kind of direction that it took in looking at her development and her journey of kind of figuring out where she belonged in this world, and figuring out who she was. And just there was a lot of really interesting stuff around her journey, and I enjoyed this one a lot more than Binti. And actually I was really glad that I picked this one up, because now I'm actually, how many times can I say actually? Now I'm really looking forward to picking up Who Fears Death, which I also have on my shelf. Next up is, I love this cover, but I didn't like this book. And for this I chose Tripping Arcadia by Kit Mayquist. This is one that is actually a new release from this year. I think it came out in either early March or late February. I'm not sure, but I know it was a new release this year. And this one's a gothic story about a young woman who takes a job working as the assistant to a wealthy family's like live-in doctor. And the setup for this one is that she's like working for them, and the book opens and tells us that she has poisoned them, and the book serves as her confession as to why she did that. And so I was really excited about this, and I was so disappointed because it's billed as being like for fans of Mexican Gothic, which is one of my favorite books, and it just did not live up to that for me because I think that the Gothic elements weren't handled well. It sets up the story, and I think it's interesting because it's like modern day. It's modern day Gothic, but it's trying to do like too much, and so there's these weird jumps in time where the character will be like, well, the first several weeks passed like this, but then all of a sudden we jump back and get this like play-by-play of her first day, and there'll be another, and then the first several months were like that, but then we jump back and get like a play-by-play of another day or another week. But those play-by-plays don't actually tell us all that much about the characters, so then by like 60-ish pages in, she's already made her decision about what she's gonna do based on evaluations of the characters that we haven't been shown. We've just kind of been told that she doesn't really like them, and all of a sudden she's like decided she's gonna poison them. So I think that happens way too early, and it's under 400 pages. It's like 380 pages, I think, and by page 100 we had not had any Gothic elements. The Gothic elements started past the 100-page point, where we finally start getting those kind of like, some of the more creepy atmosphere, and also like the setup of like, oh, there's a family secret that we don't talk about, like that kind of thing doesn't actually crop up until a third of the way through the book. And on top of that, I just didn't like the writing. It was very clunky to me. I think it was a little bit overwrought. There were sentences where significantly more words were used than were really necessary, and instead of making it sound like poetic or floral or whatever was trying to be achieved there, it just kind of made it sound clunky and a little overeager to use all of the adjectives and all the adverbs. So I just didn't really enjoy the writing either. I think that the structure and pacing and writing just weren't working for me. But I do think this is a book worth picking up if you think that the premise sounds interesting, because I do think that some of the characters seem like they could be pretty interesting, and the premise is obviously very cool. Like somebody being like, well, I poisoned them, here's why. I think that that's a lot of fun, but it just was not working for me. And then the last question here is kind of the opposite of that. What is a cover that you didn't like, or I don't like this cover, but I loved this book? And I have The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. I have actually 2 copies of this, and I like the cover on the other one better, but it's a Spanish language cover, and I haven't actually gotten around to reading it in Spanish yet. But this one, I don't hate this cover, I'm just confused. Because this story is about this half-goblin named Maya, who unexpectedly becomes the emperor of the Elven Empire, in the wake of his brother, or not his brother's death, his father and all of his half-brothers' deaths. He's kind of been raised in exile, so he finds himself suddenly emperor, and he has to figure out how to be a leader and try to integrate into the society that he basically knows nothing about because he was raised completely in exile. So I really like that setup, and this is one of my all-time favorite books, but I don't know why there's metalwork on the cover. I genuinely don't understand. There's some sort of like weird like wrought iron thing happening here, and I don't know how that fits in here. I've read this book. I don't understand. So I'm just deeply confused. And actually there's like a series of shorter books that follow a character from this, but like not Maya, and they also have this weird like wrought iron thing happening, and I genuinely don't understand. I don't know why that's the cover scheme that they've gone with this. I don't hate it, but I'm just, I don't know why they've done this, because there is actually, I'll put it somewhere on the screen, there's a really cool like a painting that was done specifically for the mass market version of this book, and the mass market paperback is like gorgeous. It's very cool, conveys a lot of the themes. You have the protagonist like right on the cover. I really enjoy that one, but I don't know why we have wrought iron in this kind of like trade paperback version. But those are all of the questions, and I think this was so much fun. I know that got pretty ranty. This is fine, I talk a lot. I'm sorry, you just have to deal with that. But I hope that you've enjoyed this video anyway, despite the ranting. I'm about to run out of space, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.